Mark Jones returned to the town he grew up in with one mission: to tear down the system that had oppressed his family and friends for generations. But when the mayor sneered at his plea for change and ordered a crackdown on black neighborhoods, Mark knew the fight would be fiercer than he ever imagined. Instead of backing down, he rallied the community and captured the nation's attention, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. What he did next would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Mark Jones stepped off the train, breathing in the familiar but bitterly changed air of his hometown. It was a place he once cherished, where he knew every corner, every street, every face. But now, his home felt like a battlefield, marred by ignorance and deeply ingrained bias. After years of fighting for social justice in the nation's capital, Mark knew he had to return. Here, where his roots ran deep, his friends, family, and neighbors had long been shouldering the weight of oppression. He was determined to bring them a voice they desperately needed, even if that meant facing an uphill struggle against the town's rigid power structures. His first move? A meeting with the city's mayor, Ethan Grant, a man whose very name made many in the black community bristle with resentment. Mayor Grant represented everything Mark stood against. He was a proud relic of an outdated mindset, deeply entrenched in privilege and dismissive of anything that challenged the town's status quo. Mark didn't take this meeting lightly. He spent days preparing a series of proposals aimed at addressing the rights and welfare of the black community in town. He outlined each step with precision and presented them as win-win solutions for everyone in the city, from better community programs to fair policing. But the moment he stepped into the mayor's office, he could sense Grant's condescension. The mayor sat back in his plush leather chair, arms crossed, looking at Mark as though he were wasting precious time. Mark began his presentation with a calm but powerful tone, explaining the ways in which systemic change could benefit the entire city, creating opportunities, easing tensions, and fostering respect among all communities. But Mayor Grant barely glanced at Mark's documents. Instead, he sighed loudly, smirked, and shook his head. "These ideas," Grant said, tapping Mark's papers with an air of amused disdain. Let's just say, they're cute. Really, Mark, do you think I'm going to let you come in here and tell me how to run this town? We've been doing just fine without these fantasies." Mark clenched his fists under the table, but forced himself to keep his composure. He pressed on, determined to explain the necessity of his proposals. But Grant's patience had already worn thin. With a deliberate show of dismissal, he turned away from Mark mid-sentence, picking up his phone and scrolling through it, barely masking a chuckle. It was a rude, deliberate signal that their conversation was over. For a moment, Mark felt the sting of humiliation, anger boiling inside him. He'd expected resistance, but not such blatant disrespect. Yet, as he walked out of that office, his resolve only grew stronger. If the mayor thought he could silence him, he was dead wrong. But Grant wasn't finished. The very next day, the mayor issued an order to the local police department to increase patrols in black neighborhoods. He framed it as a community safety initiative, but Mark saw it for what it really was: an intimidation tactic meant to keep his community under watchful control. In addition, Grant imposed new fines for minor infractions in these areas: jaywalking, loitering, minor noise complaints, measures that disproportionately targeted black residents. On his way home that evening, Mark witnessed the chilling effects of Grant's crackdown firsthand. Police cars rolled slowly through his neighborhood, officers stepping out to question teenagers on the corner and issue tickets to residents for trivial, often fabricated offenses. People were tense, watching their every move, fearing that even the smallest slip-up could land them in trouble. What Mark saw that night made it clear. This wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a personal attack on his community, on everything he was fighting to protect. Knowing he couldn't take on the city alone, Mark Jones turned to the heart of the community. A modest, aging church tucked between rows of houses that had seen generations of black families grow up, struggle, and thrive. He began hosting evening meetings in the church's basement, where the familiar scent of old wood and hymn books brought a sense of warmth and unity. People were hesitant at first, many having seen similar movements end in silence, and some even afraid of potential repercussions. But Mark's passion and genuine commitment resonated, and he soon found himself surrounded by friends and neighbors willing to fight for change. One night, after laying out his ideas, Mark noticed a familiar face in the back of the room. It was Janet Turner, a local journalist who had a reputation for being fearless in her reporting. Janet was known for her fierce independence, even in the face of pressures from city officials. She pulled Mark aside after the meeting, her voice low but determined. "Mark, people need to know what's really going on," she said. "I'm willing to risk my job if it means exposing Grant's tactics. He's counting on everyone staying quiet and scared, but if we start talking, they'll listen." With Janet's help, Mark's vision started gaining momentum. They decided to organize a series of peaceful marches across the city, with the first one set to begin at the city center and snake its way through the most heavily policed neighborhoods. It would be a show of unity, a loud but peaceful declaration that they weren't going to let their voices be silenced. Over the next few weeks, Mark and his small group of allies worked tirelessly, creating posters, gathering supplies, and reaching out to local residents to spread the word. As the day of the march approached, the atmosphere in the city grew tense. Rumors swirled about police plans to intervene, but Mark remained undeterred. His determination began to attract the attention of unexpected allies, including local business owners who were moved by the courage of the movement. They offered resources, food, and even first aid supplies, fearing the police might escalate the situation. Some even provided their own employees to help as marshals, ensuring the safety of the marchers. Finally, the day arrived. Hundreds gathered in the city square, holding handmade signs with bold messages. Equal rights for all. Our community, our voices. Stop the oppression. The sight of so many people, young and old, families and students, business owners and workers, moved Mark deeply. As he took to the front of the crowd, he felt an overwhelming wave of pride and purpose. Janet stood by his side, her camera ready to document every moment. The march began peacefully, with people chanting and singing as they walked through the neighborhoods, drawing supportive cheers from residents who watched from their porches and windows. It was a scene filled with hope and solidarity, a stark contrast to the tense and watchful stares of the police officers lining the route. But as the crowd moved closer to City Hall, a line of riot police blocked their path, shields raised and batons at the ready. Without warning, the officers began to advance. Mark urged the crowd to remain calm, to keep their hands raised in peace, but his words fell on deaf ears. The police moved in swiftly, targeting anyone who resisted with force. The peaceful march turned chaotic as officers began dragging people away, their shouts of resistance swallowed by the sound of sirens and shouted orders. In the midst of the chaos, Mark himself was seized, his arms twisted behind him as he was forced to the ground. Janet, capturing the scene on her camera, shouted his name, but she too was quickly shoved back by the officers. Determined to tell the truth, she managed to snap photos of arrests and aggressive officers, even as she was forced to retreat. That night, she wrote a powerful piece exposing the police brutality and intimidation tactics under Mayor Grant's orders. Her article, accompanied by raw photos from the march, spread like wildfire online, igniting outrage far beyond their city. Grant, humiliated and exposed, publicly condemned the march as a provocation designed to incite chaos. He declared all further protests illegal, issuing a public statement painting Mark as a troublemaker. But despite his attempts to squash the movement, the city had already tasted the bitterness of repression, and it only strengthened their resolve. Mark Jones refused to back down. The recent crackdown had only intensified his resolve, and this time he knew he needed to make an even bigger impact. He started by discreetly reaching out to prominent human rights organizations, explaining the urgency of the situation in his city and the abuse of power by local authorities. His message struck a chord, and several national groups agreed to support his cause, providing legal backing, media connections, and tactical advice on how to stage a march that couldn't be ignored. Determined to make this march unforgettable, Mark and his allies launched a crowdfunding campaign. Donations poured in from supporters near and far who were outraged by what they'd seen in Janet's article and online. With this newfound financial support, Mark and his team were able to rent high-quality equipment for live streaming, secure permits, and arrange transportation for participants who wanted to join from neighboring towns and cities. The stage was set for a major showdown. In the days leading up to the march, Mark managed to gain the attention of national media. Major news networks and popular independent journalists agreed to cover the event, seeing it as a chance to expose a broader issue of systemic abuse. The night before, Mark and his team gathered in the church basement for a final meeting. Janet was there, as well as representatives from the organizations who'd come to support them. The plan was clear. They would march peacefully, but stay connected, using social media and live streaming to document everything in real time, ensuring the world would witness any attempts to suppress them. When the day of the march finally arrived, the city streets were unrecognizable. Thousands of people had gathered, filling every corner of the downtown area, holding signs that demanded justice and equality. The energy was electric, and Mark felt an intense mix of pride and apprehension as he took his place at the front of the crowd. News crews were positioned along the route, capturing the powerful display of solidarity. Drones hovered above, streaming the event live to viewers across the country. For the first time, the eyes of the nation were fixed on this small town. But the authorities were prepared. Mayor Grant had made it clear he wouldn't tolerate a repeat of the last demonstration. The police, dressed in riot gear, were positioned at key intersections, armed with batons, shields, tear gas, and water cannons. As the march progressed peacefully, the officers remained on high alert, tensely watching as the crowd approached City Hall. Then, without warning, the police advanced. They activated the water cannons, drenching the front lines of the march and scattering people in all directions. Tear gas canisters were launched, filling the air with thick, choking clouds. The peaceful demonstration devolved into chaos as marchers scrambled to protect themselves, covering their faces with scarves and masks as they tried to evade the waves of tear gas. But this time, Mark and his team were ready. Activists equipped with cameras and phones captured every brutal moment, broadcasting it live across social media. Videos of police officers shoving elderly marchers, striking young people with batons, and targeting peaceful protesters with water cannons began to spread like wildfire. People across the nation watched in horror as the brutality unfolded, their social media feeds filled with shocking footage from the heart of the march. Hashtags calling for justice trended within hours, drawing the attention of celebrities, activists, and political leaders who began to speak out against the mayor's actions. The public outcry was deafening. The pressure mounted on the local government, and soon national leaders were calling for an investigation into Mayor Grant and his administration. News outlets ran segments on the mayor's history, exposing his pattern of oppressive policies, especially in black neighborhoods. Some members of the city council, sensing the inevitable fallout, began to distance themselves from Grant, fearing the stain of association with his actions. In a desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling reputation, Grant held a press conference, accusing Mark of inciting hatred and violence. He blamed the activist for disturbing the peace, insisting that his response had been necessary to maintain order. But his words fell flat. The public had seen the footage. They had witnessed the unprovoked aggression, the cold disregard for human dignity. Grant's reputation was irreparably damaged, and his once solid support base was now slipping through his fingers. In this critical moment, Mark's movement had not only survived, but had shattered the illusion of Grant's authority. The truth had been laid bare for all to see, and there was no going back. In the aftermath of Mayor Grant's arrest, the entire city found itself grappling with the scale of the scandal. The mayor's oppressive policies had not only been exposed, but publicly dismantled for the whole nation to see. News outlets ran endless coverage of his downfall, detailing years of abuses and injustices that had quietly festered under his rule. Grant's former allies in the city council distanced themselves, scrambling to salvage what was left of their own careers. With the mayor's position now vacant, the community stood on the brink of a new chapter. The people of the city, many of whom had once felt voiceless, turned to Mark Jones as a beacon of hope. He had proven his commitment, his resilience, and his vision for a city where justice would finally be a reality. His supporters, from local community members to respected leaders and even business owners who had witnessed the economic toll of Grant's policies, urged him to run for mayor. What started as a modest grassroots effort soon blossomed into a full-fledged campaign, with supporters rallying around the slogan, "For a Just Future." The campaign quickly gained momentum, fueled by widespread support that transcended age, background, and race. Local businesses donated funds and supplies, grassroots organizations mobilized volunteers, and even national civil rights groups endorsed him. Janet, the fearless journalist who had first shed light on the police brutality, continued her work, now serving as his campaign media director, ensuring that Mark's message reached every corner of the city. As election day approached, the excitement was palpable. Voters turned out in droves, filling the polling stations with an energy and determination that hadn't been seen in years. For many, this election was personal. It was a chance to take back their community from years of corrupt governance and to entrust it to someone who had consistently put their needs first. When the results were finally announced, Mark's victory was overwhelming. He had not only won, he had redefined the meaning of leadership for his city. The celebration spilled into the streets, people cheering and waving banners, singing songs of triumph. Mark addressed the crowd with humility, reminding them that their collective voice had made this possible. He promised transparency, fairness, and a relentless pursuit of equality, no matter the challenges ahead. His first act as mayor was swift and symbolic. Mark issued a directive to reform the police department, beginning with the immediate dismissal of officers who had actively participated in the violent suppression of peaceful protests. He implemented strict oversight policies, ensuring accountability and transparency within the force. To further solidify his vision for justice, Mark introduced new regulations that prohibited discriminatory practices in all city departments and launched a community council to ensure ongoing dialogue between the administration and the residents. The city had undergone a transformation that no one could have predicted, and the former Mayor Grant, once a figure of authority and power, left town in disgrace. The residents watched as he packed up and left, his presence now a bitter reminder of the oppression they had endured, and the victory they had achieved. His era had ended, and with it, the shadow it had cast over the city. Under Mark's leadership, the city became a symbol of change, a beacon for other communities striving to break free from injustice.